Visit gregband.com for more home improvement tips. Old lumber versus new lumber. I don't know how many people I've met that tell me they don't make things like they used to. The lumber they used to use 30 years ago was better than the lumber they're using today. Really, the reality is that is a true statement. A long time ago, they used to use only certain parts of the tree and throw the rest away. Now they use almost all of the tree, and they have all sorts of different engineered lumber products that are sold all over the place. So almost nothing goes to waste in the tree. A long time ago, the lumber was premium cut lumber. They had plenty of it, and as our natural resources started to dwindle, people came up, got a little more innovative, and created additional building products. Now, older lumber can be difficult to work with. It's brittle. Sometimes you have loose knots. The knots actually get loose or loosen up from the wood expanding and contracting over the years. So be aware of that. When you go to cut a piece of older lumber, I've actually had it splinter off, kind of like pop into my face. I'm not saying it explodes, but you could get some splintery. Sometimes even using a duller saw blade can create problems with this stuff. Now, when it comes to driving a nail into older lumber, driving a toenail in or just a regular face nail, I've seen this wood just break, just come apart, crack, big sections of it just chip off. So you might not be able to use the old lumber for everything that you think you can. So don't be surprised. Newer lumber is wet. It usually comes wet. If the lumber is kiln dried, you might have the same problems with it that you have with older lumber. So be warned there too. Kiln dried lumber can split depending on how much moisture and the part of the wood that you're driving the nail into. Wood that's wet, construction standard wood, is usually wet. This is moist wood. It hasn't been dried out thoroughly. This wood is easier to nail into and rarely splits off, breaks apart. Now, if the wood is dry and old and it's straight, there's nothing, you're probably not going to have any problems with this wood. It's going to remain straight. Wet wood can twist, bow, and warp more because it hasn't dried out. So you could have a 2x4, put it in the wall, and it's going to twist, bow, or warp, or do all sorts of things. I've seen it. I've seen wood shrink too. So I've seen a 2x12 that was 11.5 inches shrink down to 11.125 inches in 2 months in a hot summer. So if it was to get moist again, would it expand? It could. But now you have smaller lumber than you originally thought. So again, that's not a big deal. The engineers and lumber companies understand this is what happens. Should you use new wood or old wood? I'm going to leave that choice up to you. I prefer to use new wood if I can, just because it's easier to work with. I prefer to use moist wood because it's easier to work with. And then as the wood dries out, as I'm building the house, I can go through and check these areas for bowed and twisted studs, replace them, or straighten them out somehow. So that's where I stand on old and new wood. If you're tearing apart an older house or doing a remodel and you have about 10 or 15 pieces of extra wood, you can definitely reuse this wood somewhere in that project. So this is where we're heading at with construction. We might not be far away from recycling a lot of wood as the price of new wood continues to increase and more older lumber is made available. The price fluctuation might be worthwhile to use some older lumber and build your houses. So again, it's just a thought of mine. Old lumber, new lumber, hope you got a little more info on that, some of the advantages and disadvantages to using each one of the products. Here are some more websites you can visit for great tips on home remodeling and construction.